You've studied many American presidents throughout history. So, who do you think was the greatest president in American history?
The greatest American president was Abraham Lincoln. And Tolstoy reflected on this himself, actually, saying that when he was in the Caucasus, he asked these peasants in the Caucasus who was the greatest man in the world that they had heard of. And they said Abraham Lincoln. And why? Well, because he gave voice to people who had no voice before. He turned politics into an art. This is what Tolstoy recounted, the peasants in the Caucasus telling him. Lincoln made politics more than about power. He made it an art. He made it a source of liberation. And those living even far from the United States could see that model, that inspiration from Lincoln. He was a man who had 2 years of education, yet he mastered the English language. And he used the language to help people imagine a different kind of world. You see, leaders and presidents are at their best when they're doing more than just manipulating institutions and power, when they're helping the people imagine a better world. And he did that as no other president has.
And you say he gave voice to those who are voiceless. Who are you talking to about in general? Is this about African Americans, or is this about just the populace in general?
Certainly part of it is about slaves, African Americans, and many immigrants, immigrants from all parts of Europe and other areas that have come to the United States. But part of it was just for ordinary American citizens. The Republican Party, for which Lincoln was the first president, was a party created to give voice to poor white men, as well as slaves and others. And Lincoln was a poor white man himself, grew up without slaves and without land, which meant you had almost nothing.
What do you think about the trajectory of that man with only 2 years of education? Is there something to be said about how does one come from nothing and nurture the ideals that kind of make this country great into something where you can actually be a leader of this nation, to espouse those ideas, to give the voice to the voiceless?
Yes, I think you actually hit the nail on the head. I think what he represented was the opportunity, and that was the word that mattered for him, opportunity that came from the ability to raise yourself up, to work hard, and to be compensated for your hard work. And this is at the core of the Republican Party of the 19th century, which is the core of capitalism. It's not about getting rich. It's about getting compensated for your work. It's about being incentivized to do better work. And Lincoln was constantly striving. One of his closest associates, Herndon, said he was the little engine of ambition that couldn't stop. He just kept going, taught himself to read, taught himself to be a lawyer. He went through many failed businesses before he even reached that point, many failed love affairs. But he kept trying, he kept working. And what American society offered him, and what he wanted American society to offer everyone else, was the opportunity to keep trying, to fail and then get up and try again.
What do you think was the nature of that ambition? Was there a hunger for power?
I think Lincoln had a hunger for success. I think he had a hunger to get out of the poor station he was in. He had a hunger to be someone who had control over his life. Freedom for him did not mean the right to do anything you want to do, but it meant the right to be secure from being dependent upon someone else. So independence. He writes in his letters when he's very young that he hated being dependent on his father. He grew up without a mother. His father was a struggling farmer, and he would write in his letters that his father treated him like a slave on the farm. Some think his hatred of slavery came from that experience. He didn't ever want to have to work for someone again. He wanted to be free and independent, and he wanted, again, every American, this is the kind of Jeffersonian dream, to be the owner of themselves and the owner of their future.
You know, that's a really nice definition of freedom. We often think kind of this very abstract notion of being able to do anything you want, but really it's ultimately breaking yourself free from the constraints, like the very tight dependence on whether it's the institutions or on your family or the expectations or the community or whatever. Be able to realize yourself within the constraints of your own abilities. It's still not true freedom, because true freedom is probably sort of almost like designing a video game character or something like that.
I agree. I think that's exactly right. I think freedom is not that I can have any outcome I want. I can't control outcomes. The most powerful, freest person in the world cannot control outcomes. Yeah. But it means that at least I get to make choices. Someone else doesn't make those choices for me.
Is there something to be said about Lincoln and on the political game front of it, which is he's accomplished some of them? I don't know, but it seems like there was some tricky politics going on. We tend to not think of it in those terms because of the dark aspects of slavery. We tend to think about it in sort of ethical and human terms, but in their time, it was probably as much a game of politics, not just these broad questions of human nature, right? It was a game. So is there something to be said about being a skillful player in the game of politics that you take from Lincoln?
Absolutely. And Lincoln never read Karl von Clausewitz, the great 19th century German thinker on strategy and politics, but he embodied the same wisdom, which is that everything is politics. If you want to get anything done, and this includes even relationships, there's a politics to it. What does that mean? It means that you have to persuade, coerce, encourage people to do things they wouldn't otherwise do. And Lincoln was a master at that. He was a master at that for two reasons. He had learned through his hard life to read people, to anticipate them, to spend a lot of time listening. One thing I often tell people is the best leaders are the listeners, not the talkers. And then second, Lincoln was very thoughtful and planned every move out. He was thinking 3 or 4 moves, maybe 5 moves down the chessboard, while others were at move number 1 or 2.
That's fascinating to think about him just listening,
Yes.
just studying. That's they look at great fighters in this way. Like the first few rounds in boxing and mixed martial arts, you're studying the movement of your opponent in order to sort of to find the holes. That's a really interesting frame to think about it.